I do love the spring game, opportunity for our fans to be here inside of the stadium, but it's usually a great environment on campus that day. I think it's important, in particular for our young players, to get a taste of what it's going to be like in the fall.
Hello and welcome to Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and today is Monday, March 10th. We are so excited about the next couple weeks here on Always College Football. Why? Because we're really diving into the teams. We're diving into the spring storylines from all the Power 4 teams. That's right. If you are a fan of a team in the Power 4, we will talk about your team at length at some point here in the next 2 weeks. I really love these shows because hope springs eternal, man. We are all undefeated here in March. And while, yes, we will all catch L's for the most part in the next 7-8 months, today we're undefeated. And there's reason for optimism. There's also things that need to be answered. We got questions coming into spring. There's competitions that need to be had. There's quarterback battles. There's offensive line challenges. There's struggles with new coordinators stepping into roles and trying to revamp a side of the football that struggled last year. There's a million examples of great storylines this time of year. And while we've done big picture the last few weeks, we will continue to do big picture. Now it's time to dive in to some of the biggest things that we're looking to find out for each Power 4 team in the next couple weeks when it comes to spring practice. I'm Greg McElroy. Like I said, very much appreciate you that are here with us on Always College Football. I ask all of you kindly to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show. It doesn't matter where you get the show. If you're on the podcast platforms with Apple Podcast or with Spotify, that's awesome. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, that is also terrific. Just hit that thumbs up. Make sure that you subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube channel so that you can continue to get awesome content from us here at ACF on a weekly basis. Today, we're going to dive into the SEC. We will kick things off in the Southeastern Conference. We will go team by team. All 16 teams in the SEC will have their time in the spotlight. What do we want to learn? What competitions are going on? What's the biggest spring question for each Southeastern Conference team? And if you listen closely, you might even hear some of the teams that I think are spoilers or maybe sleepers or maybe playoff contenders or maybe national championship contenders. So should be a fun show. We'll dive in and we will kick things off in Tuscaloosa with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Okay, in the SEC, we will kick things off with the Alabama Crimson Tide. For those of you that are wondering why we've chosen the order that we are going to go through, it's because it's alphabetical. We always do this, but everybody, that Alabama guy, he always wants to start with the Tide. Yes, sure, I do. I like the Tide. That is accurate, but they all are also the number one team in the alphabet in the SEC. So we'll kick things off there. Spring camp opened last week. They will have their spring game on April 12th. It will not be televised. And the big question for the Tide this year is pretty simple. They've addressed the defense by getting a lot of really good pieces back. The defense is going to be rock solid, should be again under second-year coordinator Kane Womack. The offense now has a new man calling the shots. That's Ryan Grubb. And the big question is, who is going to separate themselves in the quarterback competition? It's probably going to be the most hotly debated quarterback contest in the SEC next year. There will be other competitions going on, but this is probably the one with the biggest stakes. I really believe that if Alabama can get stability at the quarterback spot, they could really win a national championship next year. Really, if you look at the pieces that are back, the improvements that have been made on the defensive side, the hopeful improvements with the offensive line, and the upgrades that will hopefully be felt at wide receiver, if the quarterback play can be great, national championship is not completely out of the realm of possibility. So let's look at the three that are competing for the job right now. The guy that probably has the inside track is Ty Simpson. He was the backup last year to Jalen Milroe. Played sparingly, not a ton, but when he was in there, he did a pretty good job. One thing that I've been really interested in with Ty Simpson is how does he develop as a leader? Ty Simpson, I was told by the staff 2 years ago that he was the best quarterback on the roster. The problem is at that point, there were some things that needed to be ironed out with his own confidence, what he could get away with, what he can do at this level, what he can't do at this level. The other thing that I think they've found out with this staff is that he's a little more mobile, a little more athletic than people realized, and he can be a factor in the quarterback run game if needed. But with the upgrades at wide receiver, the advancement of Ryan Williams going into his second year, Jeremy Bernard as his number 2 wide receiver, him being another year in the system, they're in Tuscaloosa. And with an addition or 2 in the portal, this group might be poised to break out. And Ty Simpson, as an accurate drop-back passer to keep you honest with his legs, might be the perfect guy to run the offense. The guys that are competing with him, the gap exists. I believe the gap exists right now between Ty Simpson and everybody else. But how big is that gap? That'll be determined as the spring goes along. The guys he's going against are freshman Keelan Russell, who was the top recruit for Alabama this past recruiting cycle, the number 2 overall player from Texas, where he went to Alabama and really excited the fan base and has excited the coaching staff. He's got a crazy high ceiling, but on a team that has real national championship considerations, is it beneficial to go with a true freshman? I don't know. Maybe Keelan Russell can play mature beyond his years and deliver early in his career. And then the other guy is Austin Mack, transfer from Washington that came with the staff previously that they also feel really good about. Not as mobile, but a good pocket passer at 6'6", has great length and can really put great touch on the football. So 3-way quarterback battle. Ty Simpson is certainly the man to beat, but with the upside of Russell and the upside of Mack, don't be surprised if this conversation and competition goes all the way into fall camp. Moving next to the Arkansas Razorbacks. Camp opened on March 10th today. So we're going to see them on the field on April 19th. That's when camp is supposed to close up. The big question for me for Arkansas is who's going to step up around Taylen Green. We know what Taylen Green is at the quarterback spot. He's back for a second season under Bobby Petrino. I thought he had a great year last year. I thought there were a lot of really positive moments. He went for over 3,100 yards, had 23 touchdowns. There's a lot to like with what we saw from Taylen Green. He's super dynamic with the ball in his hands. The guy is a playmaker and does it all the time. Now, there are areas where he can grow, like short-range accuracy. I don't think he played with great anticipation last year, but it was his first year in the system. Let's give him some time to get more comfortable. Maybe this year he'll throw with better anticipation, maybe a little bit more accurate on some of the underneath throws. He's also going to need some people around him to step up. Look, Sam Pittman, the head coach of Arkansas, he's an O-line guy. That's who he is. And the O-line has been a disappointment the last couple years. They were sacked 32 times last year. That's not great. They need to figure out a way to be better up front. They have to be. They have got to find a way to make sure that they keep their quarterback upright. And Taylen Green can play a role here. He's a runaround guy and sometimes holds the ball a little too long. But if he can figure out a way to get it out a little earlier, that's fine. They brought in 5 transfers from the FBS and an offensive lineman from JUCO to help alleviate some of the concerns up front. And then finally, you got to find out what the wide receiver is going to look like. You lose Andrew Armstrong. He's gone to the NFL. Isaiah Satenga transferred to Oklahoma. They brought in 4 transfer wide receivers, including Cam Shanks from UAB, who is not just great in offense, but he was also terrific in punt returns as well and had a couple punt return touchdowns last year. So we'll see what the wide receiver core looks like. But Taylen Green, we know we got him if we're Arkansas. He's going to be great for us. Now, what can we do around him along the offensive line and at wide receiver to make sure it's not a one-man show for the Hogs here in 2025? The Auburn Tigers opened spring camp with a lot of optimism heading into this upcoming year. They've had a great offseason. I know things didn't go very well there in 2024, but they feel like they've adequately addressed a few significant positions. But the biggest spring question for me when it comes to Auburn, how confident is Jackson Arnold, their new quarterback, and how quickly can he develop chemistry with a really high-quality receiver core? Jackson Arnold came to college as the number 3 overall prospect in the 2023 class. What I would say about Jackson Arnold is that we have seen this before. Do you not remember just a couple years ago, it was 2021, there was a young man by the name of Spencer Rattler that had lit the world on fire in 2020. It was amazing, was great. And then going into 2021, he lost all of his confidence. He ends up getting beaten out by his backup quarterback, a guy that went on to become the number 1 overall pick and Heisman Trophy winner. But Spencer Rattler, he got a second chance. He went to South Carolina and ended up having a terrific career. I think that's what they're hoping for Jackson Arnold, because it's not about talent. It's never been about talent with Jackson Arnold. It's about playing with confidence and making great decisions. The good news is, I think when you look at the quarterback spot down the stretch for Oklahoma last year, when he was reinserted into the lineup as the starter, he wasn't a great thrower. He completed just 62% of his passes, but he did a pretty dang good job learning how to run the football. They kind of played to his strengths, and I think Auburn might lean into that as well, knowing that there are a couple question marks at running back, and they went out and signed an additional quarterback in the transfer portal in Ashton Daniels, who was at Stanford last season. He's there as a veteran backup to Jackson Arnold. And if you want to go one step further, you still have Deuce Knight, who was the number 2 dual threat quarterback in the ESPN 300 last year. So whoever's a quarterback, though, Jackson Arnold, of course, being the most likely candidate to be the guy, the wide receiver core, and I've been following Auburn for a long time now, 20 years as a player and now as an analyst. I think this is the best receiver core that Auburn has had in well over 20, 25 years. I really believe that. Now, are there some that I'm missing? Perhaps. I wasn't that dialed into Auburn in 2001, and what they has is their wide receivers. But I know this, the trio that is Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton, and Horatio Fields is about as good as you're going to find as far as what they could become. We'll start with Coleman. He was the second leading receiver last year, but it was really the second half of the season, the last few games of the season, where things really started to click for him. He finished with 37 for 594, but the productivity down the stretch was what really impressed me. And then Singleton was one of the best receivers in the portal coming over from Georgia Tech. He's a great deep threat, has tremendous juice, went for 750 last year in an offense that was primarily run heavy. You look at Horatio Fields as well at Wake Forest. He was very productive on an offense that struggled as well. So I think those 3 receivers make up one of the best receiving cores in the SEC, and whoever the quarterback is for Auburn, assuming it's Jackson Arnold, should be very confident in developing a rapport with them throughout spring practice. Moving over to a team that has, I think, sky-high expectations, and expectedly so. With how the Florida Gators finished the season last year, with the pieces that they have coming back, with the experience they have coming back, and with the quarterback situation poised for an even bigger breakout campaign, Florida could be a dark horse contender for the college football playoff this upcoming season. Now, the schedule's brutal. We know that. But if you look at what the big spring question is for the Gators is, are there some young players that we need to keep an eye on? Because this is a veteran-laden group that centerpiece in DJ Lagway is about as strong foundationally as you will find. Now, Billy Napier told everybody last week that DJ Lagway would be limited in practice. He's nursing a shoulder injury from last season, which is unfortunate because it would be great. He's still a young player. It would be great for him to develop a rapport with the new targets. I think that's one of the biggest questions. Who are going to be the go-to guys in the passing game for Lagway this upcoming season? Elijah Badger and Shamir DK are both gone from the NFL. Eugene Wilson is back after a disappointing season last year. He had hip surgery that led to his season being cut short. But you look at some of the young players that are going to be there at the wide receiver spot. Vernell Brown III, Dallas Wilson, Nashawn Montgomery, 3 of the highest ranked signees. And we know this, at wide receiver, you can get on the field early. We've seen it in the SEC for years and years. Freshmen can have an impact. Young players can have an impact at that position if they can figure out ways to be as physical as the opposing defenders that they will face on a week-to-week basis. They also added J. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA, who should be one of the more reliable pieces that they have there at the wide receiver spot. He's a veteran, and I think Florida, I'm telling you, if they can figure out wide receiver, if they can make some improvements defensively, if the offensive line can gel, I think Florida's an extremely dangerous team coming into this upcoming year. Florida's biggest rival, the Georgia Bulldogs, will open camp tomorrow and end on April 12th. The big question for Georgia this year is, can they find some offensive balance and some consistency amongst the wide receivers? Last year, A lot of people will remember back to last year and they'll think about Georgia through the lens of, well, they won the SEC. They made it to the college football playoff. Yes, they lost to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl, but that was a successful season. It was. Because I think when you look at what their roster looked like to get to that point with the inconsistencies that they had last year was pretty remarkable. I thought Kirby Smart did a really good job coaching them last year. The offensive line was a mess. The wide receivers dropped more passes than anybody in the country, and their quarterback for a 2 to 3 game period turned the ball over like crazy. Not to mention the defense at times had some struggles as well. This is a team that almost lost to Kentucky, a team that almost lost to Georgia Tech, a team that was the game against Auburn was much closer than you probably want to remember. You almost had a win against Bama, but it was ugly there in the first half. It was a very, very difficult team to watch. When you're expecting a certain level of performance from Georgia and all you get are roller coasters, it's a little bit troubling. Okay. The offensive production last year slipped drastically. They scored 31 points a game, but if you look back at the year prior, they were over 40 points a game in 2023. They were terrible when it comes to running the football. That was one of the biggest issues. Now, a lot of things went into that. Tate Ratledge got banged up early in the season. The offensive line struggled from a continuity standpoint. The left tackle was banged up most of the year. And you were without Trevor Etienne with a rib injury for quite some time as well. Then the guy that you were putting in for Trevor Etienne, Nate Frazier, was a little loose with the football from time to time. Crazy explosive, crazy dynamic, but he would at times put the ball on the deck. He did it in practice. He also did it in the game. So they're going to have to figure out a way to create a little bit more balance. And Gunnar Stockton, likely as the starting quarterback, his ability to run the ball at the quarterback spot should only improve that balance offensively. They do have to find a lot of answers along the front, along the offensive line. You have 4 new starting offensive linemen, several of which are highly touted, so it should be a really good group. Last year, they were expected to be really good, but it really wasn't very good whatsoever. So you got to figure out how to replace the center, Jared Wilson. You got to replace Tate Ratledge, who was gone for quite some time. You got to replace Monroe Freeling at right tackle and who played a little left tackle as well. And then Ernest Green, who was not great to begin with, but was hurt most of last year. I do think they have some quality pieces that are poised to step in, but it'll be very, very tough. And it really won't matter, especially if their wide receivers can't catch the ball. They led the Power Four, like I said earlier, in drops. Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, they're both gone. They did bring in some high-profile transfers in Noah Thomas from Texas A&M and Zachariah Branch, who's tremendously athletic and crazy explosive from USC. They also have a couple of hot-shot freshmen as well in Taylen Taylor and CJ Wiley, who might find their way onto the field a little bit earlier as well. So I think figuring out the receiver core is of the utmost importance, but more specifically figuring out a way to create balance and create continuity along the offensive line are of equal importance as well. The Kentucky Wildcats are trying to get back to the basics this year. Can they get the offense going? That's the big question. Camp opens up today. They'll be going all the way through mid-April, just like everybody else. And it's been crazy churn as far as turnover is concerned amongst the Wildcats this offseason. 31 new players are on the roster. 20 of those 31 came by way of the transfer portal. But the big key is trying to figure out how to be a little bit better along the offensive line of scrimmage. When Kentucky's been at their best, they were elite along the offensive line, one of the best groups in the country. And they have now kind of regressed over the last few years, and it's going to have to turn it around. The big blue wall for many years now has not been nearly as effective. They ranked 111th last year in sacks allowed. They gave up 35. They were 81st in rushing last year at just over 145 yards a game. The good news is Mark Stoops acknowledged this, went out, added 5 offensive linemen in the transfer portal, including what should be a really good left tackle in Shizaiah Pete from New Mexico State. They're going to have to figure out that position significantly. The other thing, too, they really didn't have much of a threat of the passing game at all. They were 112th in the FBS in passing last year at just over 184 yards per game. They threw more interceptions than touchdowns. So can Zach Calzada, the 6th-year senior who has stopped at A&M, started his career there, went to Auburn, where he didn't really play hardly at all, went to Incarnate Word in the FCS. Now he's back in the SEC at Kentucky. Can he be the answer to an offense that can hopefully find a way to continue to establish the line of scrimmage? Last year, he threw for over 3,700 yards and 40 touchdowns. He's always had talent. Can he stay healthy? And can this group get back to the ground and pound nature that made them very successful in the early part of Mark Stoops' tenure as the head coach at Kentucky? Moving over to LSU, camp opened just a couple days ago. They'll finish up on April 12th. Just about everybody finishing up on April 12th for the most part. The big question, who's going to step up along both lines of scrimmage? We know the centerpiece of what LSU wants to be next year. We know they have a stud at quarterback. Garrett Nussmeier had a really good season last year. Really good. Now, there were moments in which maybe he was a little bit loose with the football in the latter part of the season. There were a couple times where I wish he would take off and run a little bit more as opposed to waiting in the pocket for someone to uncover. But for the most part, man, if you are hanging your hopes this upcoming season on Garrett Nussmeier, you're probably in pretty good shape. The problem is what will you have outside at the wide receiver spot, and what will you have along the offensive line where you lost two of the best offensive linemen in the SEC last year? They went and added Nick Anderson from Oklahoma. They went and added Barryon Brown from Kentucky. Those should be huge in reinforcing the offensive personnel on the perimeter. Aaron Anderson's back at the slot. He's amazing. So I think you have a really good trio of receivers for Garrett Nussmeier to throw to. But who are the guys up front that are going to be protecting Garrett Nussmeier? Just said a moment ago, he's not a guy that likes to take off and run. So he's not going to really be able to keep you honest with his legs very often. He can, he just hasn't up until this point of his career. So that's going to put extra pressure on the offensive line that is trying to replace the left tackle Will Campbell and the right tackle Emory Jones. That's going to be very tough to replace those pieces. They went out and added a couple guys in the portal, like Josh Thompson from Northwestern and Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech. But will those guys be able to step right in and become the plug-and-play pieces that they had last year? They have tons of competition that's going on at the tackle spots, so we'll continue to monitor that throughout spring and summer, and probably, if we're going to be honest, into fall camp. But the losses along the offensive line, they're also going to be felt along the defensive line as well. They lost their two edge rushers, and Braden Swinson on one side and Savion Jones on the other. They combined for 13 sacks last year. Now, they went out and they made some big investments in their edge rushers by way of the portal. They go out and they get Patrick Payton from Florida State. They go out and get Jack Pyburn, which is a big add as well. And they get Jamari Butler from Nebraska. Now, Payton's one of the big coups in the portal. It was the 2022 ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. Had 31 and a half tackles for loss and 16 sacks in the 3 years for Florida State. But he really dropped off in production last year. When Jared Verse wasn't on the other side, Patrick Payton just wasn't quite the same guy. He only had 4 sacks last year, and 3 of them came against Cal. So he's going to have to step back up, but hopefully, because they got 2 or 3 guys in the portal that can help affect the opposing quarterback, that will allow them to kind of play the hot hand there on a week-to-week basis. Mississippi State trying to make a lot of progress from a season that was extremely disappointing last year. So the big question, I look at what Mississippi State's going to do offensively. I think they're going to be fine on offense. The big question is, can they make progress on defense? They have to figure out a way to improve one of the worst defenses in the entire country. They were 118th in scoring defense last year. They gave up just under 35 points a game. They were 130th against the run at just under 217 yards a game given up, and they were 105th in passing defense at just under 240 yards given up. So all in all, total defense, they were 126th. They have to be better on that side of the ball. The big problems really started up front. And I think that's why Jeff Lebby looked at the portal this year and said, we got to get better along the defensive front 7. So what they do, they went out and got 7 guys that play defensive line in the portal. They generated just 10 sacks last year. That was the second fewest in the FBS. They went out and got Red Hibbler from NC State. He was pretty good a couple years back, but didn't really do much last year because he redshirted after 4 games being played. They went out and got Will Whitson, who had 8.5 tackles for a loss and 5 sacks at Coastal Carolina. So can he make the jump from Coastal Carolina to the SEC? We'll find out. But hopefully Mississippi State has found some answers defensively they did not have a year ago. That's a big priority for them this spring. Moving over to the Missouri Tigers, whose camp opened really early back in February and will wrap up here just 10 days from now. The big question is, will a new look offense take shape? The centerpiece of what they did this offseason was bring in Bo Pribula, a transfer from Penn State. He's likely going to be the guy that replaces Brady Cook, and I'm super bullish on the fit for Pribula here at Missouri. He's got great mobility. He has never started a game in college, and he hasn't had some long, extended playing time in which he's been thrust into a drop back passing style of attack. He's got just 56 total passes in 3 seasons in his career. But I'm really optimistic because this young man has come off the bench in favor of injury in the past. He went and won games for Penn State last year in the regular season, and Penn State staff was extremely concerned when he was unavailable to them there in the postseason because he had transferred to Missouri. This kid has a chance to be really, really good. We've seen this work in the past where Penn State transfers have left, and it worked well for Kentucky when Will Levis transferred down there from Penn State. And I think when you talk to people that are familiar with Bo Pribula's game, a lot of people think he's a lot like Trace McSorley in that skill set. He can run, he can throw, he's scrappy, and he's got a chance, I think, to have a really nice season for an offense that should be very favorable for the young quarterback. Well, relatively young. Inexperienced quarterback is probably a little bit more accurate. He's a redshirt junior, so he's been around for quite a while. Looking at some of the other pieces that they have, his wheels and his running ability is something that will be a factor. He's played in 24 career games, 6 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. But they do have to figure out who he's going to be throwing passes to because Missouri's going to be without Luther Burden. They're going to be without Theo Weiss and Mookie Cooper. All 3 are done at Missouri. So they went out in the portal and they got Mississippi State transfer Kevin Coleman, who was 3rd team All-SEC according to the coaches last year. They went and got Marquise Johnson. He had a kind of a coming out party in the Music City Bowl, went for 122 and a touchdown in that game. And you also have Joshua Manning, who at times I think showcased the ability to be a highly dependable player for the Tigers last year. They have a junior in Daniel Blood, who has made some appearances the last couple of years, and James Madison II was a really highly recruited high school player back in their signing class from a year ago. They do have to replace a couple key pieces along the offensive line. That will be huge, including having to replace Armand Menbu at right tackle. Their interior 3 should be really good. I think that group's going to be rock solid. Figuring out who replaces Mimbu at the right side will be massive. But I think Missouri is one of those sleeper teams that not enough people are talking about heading into this upcoming season. We'll move forward to the Oklahoma Sooners as a team that is also, I think, a bit of a sleeper this year. They're going to be good on defense. We'll talk about them here in just a minute. But the big storyline surrounding Oklahoma's offseason has been the addition of Ben Arbuckle, the new offensive coordinator for the Sooners. They finished second to last in the SEC last year in scoring offense. They scored just 24 points per game, and they produced just 20 points or fewer in all 9 of their games against power conference opponents. So they got to be better on offense, right? This offseason, this will give us our first glimpse of what new coordinator Ben Arbuckle's offense is going to look like with new quarterback John Mateer pulling the trigger at the quarterback spot. Now, John Mateer was one of the most highly coveted players in the portal this offseason. I love his game. I think he's going to be really, really good. I don't know, because a lot of people have drawn the comparisons with John Mateer. Oh, he's going to be just like Cam Ward, who went from Washington State under Arbuckle to Miami and had a real chance to win the Heisman Trophy, and now has parlayed that success in college to what might be a top 2, top 3 pick in the NFL draft. I don't know if that's going to happen for John Mateer, but I'm very bullish on his comfort level within the offense and having a distribution mentality there as the guy that will be calling the shots. He's also extremely mobile. He can run, he can create, and his legs will be a big factor for an offensive line that struggled at times last year. The good news about quarterback, though, is you don't have to play it by yourself. And he has really good pieces that should be back at wide receiver after that group was just completely ravaged with injury last year. Deion Burks barely played. Jaden Gibson's there as well. This wide receiver core, Deion Burks, last year at this time, we were talking about him as a potential All-American candidate. Well, it never really got off the ground because he was just way too banged up throughout the season. I think that's something to watch, is how Mateer aligns with Deion Burks and how they factor into the passing game while utilizing the ground game a little bit more. I think last year, if you look, and partly because the offensive line struggled, that's big, but I think they're going to have to find a little bit more on the offensive line and a little bit more in the run game to take some of the pressure off Mateer, who does take a pretty significant step up in quality of competition with what he saw last year to what he's going to see this year. One other thing is a bonus, by the way, for Oklahoma. Look, I know all of us, you that are listening, that are Sooner fans, all we care about this year is probably the offense, right? Spring is all about the offense. I want to see Mateer. I want to see the offense. I want to see Arbuckle. I want to see the system. Yes, I get that. But as a bonus, I'm really curious to see how the defense does. Look, it's been a long time. Okay, Danny Stutzman's been at Oklahoma for as long as I can remember. He was the unquestioned leader when things were going haywire and things were slipping away. He was the one that kind of grabbed it and said, nope, we're not letting this happen. We're going to get things back on track. You have Billy Bowman, Ethan Downs, Woody Washington, all those guys, that leadership contingent, that high-level leadership contingent, they're all gone. And there's a lot of guys on that side of the ball that will not return that I am not concerned about, but I'm curious to see who fills that void. Now, R. Mason Thomas is probably the best defensive player coming back, right? He's a game changer. He's fantastic. But will he be a guy that can certainly hold the rest of the guys accountable the way Danny Stutzman did last year? We'll be curious to see that. Could be Kobe McKenzie in there as well. Maybe he's that leader that everyone seems to point to as well. So very, very curious to see how things go there. I'm very interested in seeing how they're going to perform. Moving next to the Ole Miss Rebels, who open camp just a week from now. Their spring will culminate there on April 19th. The big question is, how good will Austin Simmons be? And can they adequately replace all the great players along the defensive front? Now, Jackson Dart, we know what he was as a college football player. We know how now that the draft process is going on, teams are kind of falling in love with what Jackson Dart was able to do. Understandable. I get it. I understand that. But I also look too, and I know that Jackson Dart had great comfort within the system. He had great personnel around him. But man, I've seen Jackson Dart throw in person. I've seen it come off his hand. It's really impressive. He does a great job. He's a great player. But I've seen it come out of Austin Simmons' hand as well. And man, it's different. You know, you can just tell, all right, that's different. That's what Austin Simmons is. Now, he was thrust into the game against Georgia, a series into the game after Jackson Dart rolled his ankle, and he went right down the field against Georgia, mind you, in the rain. He's 6'4", 215 pounds. He's a perfect fit for the system. And I've had coaches tell me he is as talented a guy as they've seen throwing the football in a little while. He's that good. Very, very capable arm. Now, will it matter? I don't know. He's got to play, right? He's got to go and play well. And maybe he makes mistakes. Maybe he doesn't see the field great. But I'm talking just flat out how the ball comes off his hand. There's a lot to like about what this young man might do in Lane Kiffin's system. Defensively, this is one of the best groups in the country last year. They were second nationally in scoring defense. They were second in run defense, and they were third in sacks. Now, a lot of that production was from the pieces up front. They're going to be without Princely Umanmielen, who is a great presence there off the edge. They're going to be without Walter Nolan, who was excellent. Always had to account for him on the interior. Now, they have some pieces back. Suntaran Perkins is back. He had 10.5 sacks. And then you have Xavion Harris, who's poised to be a huge breakout star, potentially a defensive tackle as well. So there's plenty there, but it's not going to be quite as star-studded as it was a year ago. How will Ole Miss replace that personnel defensively? I think they can do it, but it will be challenging for sure going into this upcoming season. South Carolina had an impressive breakthrough last year, man. I don't think at this point, when we were talking in the spring in 2024, none of us would have said, oh, South Carolina's going to be a fringe playoff contender. I thought they had a chance to go bowling. I thought they could get to 6, maybe 7, but a playoff contention and having a couple close calls against Bama, a couple close calls against LSU, you get both those wins. Not only are you playoff contending, you're playing in the SEC championship. You might have a chance to get to the point where you win the SEC. Who knows? The way this team was playing down the stretch, anything was possible. The big question, who's going to step up at wide receiver and who's going to replace that veteran leadership on defense? Now, Shane Beamer, just the second coach at South Carolina in the last 40 years to win 9 regular season games. So that puts into perspective just how special last season was. Now, Steve Spurrier did it. We know that. But Shane Beamer took the Gamecocks to very, very thin air, rare air last year with how they played. I think they played some of their best football down the stretch with how things kind of continued to culminate and how they peaked when they had to there in November. We know that they have one of the best quarterback prospects in the country in LaNorris Sellers. He did an amazing job last year, was super athletic, difficult to bring down. I think he got more and more confidence as the season went along and became a guy that at times, just when you thought the play was over, it wasn't. He'd somehow spin around, pull a Houdini, and next thing you know, what would have been a sack is now a 37-yard gain and a possible touchdown. So we know we can build around him at quarterback. The problem is the group that he had at wide receiver last year was extremely underwhelming. Now, Jared Brown, Nick Harbor, Mazio Bennett, Van Jacobs, those guys are all needing to collectively take a pretty big step towards allowing this passing attack to become a little bit more dynamic. Now, they had some injuries and they had some inconsistencies, but here's hoping that those guys together can take a big step along with LaNorris Sellers this offseason. Now, Nick Harbor's been the guy that everybody's talked about forever. He certainly looks the part at 6'5", 235. But remember, this is a guy that runs track. And his development, I think, does get a little bit hindered because of his commitment to track when in the offseason, most guys are focused exclusively on getting better as a football player. He's focusing on trying to win national championships in track. So him improving in the summer will be of significant importance because he will be unavailable for the most part at this time of year because of his commitment to track. Now, he did a good job down the stretch last year, finished 272 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns on 15 receptions. So hopefully he can build on that performance and with how he got a little more confident down the stretch. So see these receivers, see if they can get back. We know we have the building block on offense, but the building block on defense is Dylan Stewart. Okay. He is the key defensively, and they have to replace a lot on that side of the ball. Now, I know South Carolina fans don't want to acknowledge it, and Dylan Stewart can single-handedly take over the game, but the importance of what Kyle Kennard brought to the other side of the defensive line. He was an All-American. He was an SEC, first team All-SEC. He was amazing. So now that he's gone, Dylan Stewart's going to get more attention, and that will be very, very difficult. This is a group that finished in the top 20 in scoring defense, yards per play, rushing defense, and Stewart will be the centerpiece of a defense that does have to replace an awful lot beyond him. Now, they went out into the portal. They got some transfers. They got Brownlow Diddy at defensive tackle from A&M. They got Jalen Brown, defensive end from Missouri. They got Justin Okoronkwo from Alabama, Sean Murphy from Florida State. So they have some reinforcements on its way, but will they be able to replace a group that collectively across the board, everyone was like 24 years old last year. It was a veteran group, so it will be a difficult piece to replace on the defensive side. Tennessee Volunteers went to the College Football Playoff last year, and now that's the expectation for Tennessee moving forward, is to be in that position on an annual basis. The big question this year, can the Vols adequately replace the impact players on both lines of scrimmage? You look at last year in Tennessee and how they ran the football behind Dylan Sampson. It was amazing. He was their most valuable player. I think he should have been on the short list for the Heisman Trophy conversation. When he was in the game, they were a different team. This offensive line, at times, really good. Other times, at tackle in particular, really bad. the inconsistencies up front, I think, somehow curbed the enthusiasm I had for the overall quality that we're going to get from the offensive side. Now, Nico Iamaleava, he's a great piece to build around. That's a great piece to kind of center the production around. He did a good job down the stretch. Remember, he missed a lot of throws last year. First 6-7 games of the year, there were a lot of misses. But really the last 5 or 6 games, started to see a little bit more consistency on hitting some of those deep balls. And if that can continue and his progress can continue, that could be significant. But they got to be able to protect him, because the offensive line last year was at times a real problem. The tackles struggled. There's no way to try to spin it in any other direction. They struggled there. But they should feel pretty good about some of the pieces that they added in the portal. Sam Pendleton is transferred from Notre Dame that has starting experience. You bring in Wendell Moe from Arizona. Those two guys should be factoring in. You also have the number 1 tackle prospect in America, and David Saunders is expected to be an immediate starter. Maybe he plugs in there at the right side, and he can hold down that side of the football throughout the course of this season. So a lot of competition going on up front, and hopefully the tackles in general will be better for the Volunteers this season, and allowing Nico to stand back there and be comfortable, not worried about holding calls and his blind side not being protected. On defense, that's why they made the playoff last year. Their run game and their defense. And there's a lot of pieces that need to be replaced up front. Yes, James Pierce is one, but there's a handful of others that did the little things that allowed James Pierce to get as much freedom as he occasionally got when rushing the opposing quarterback on obvious passing situations. Now, keeping defensive coordinator Tim Banks was huge, right? That was big for Josh Heupel, because a lot of people wanted to have a conversation with Tim Banks, and he stayed. That's massive. But now, going into year number 5 for Josh Heupel, I think they need to be better on the road, and they got to be better along the offensive line. Defensive line, if they can adequately replace that group, they should be back in the mix this year for a college football playoff opportunity. Will they make it? I don't know, but they have the opportunity to compete for one. That's for sure, if they can adequately replace those guys on defense. The Texas Longhorns, their camp opens up about a week from now. They won't have a spring game. Steve Sarkisian and company, they've already been very outspoken about how little they're going to showcase the outside world, because everybody wants the Texas Longhorn players to hop in the portal there in the spring portal season. This is Arch Manning, right? Like, what are we really going to try to explain that? Yeah, hey, I really want to watch the O-line. Okay, sure. Yeah. I'm going to be paying attention to the O-line for the Texas Longhorns. Yes, that matters. I'm excited about that. Let's be real. Am I really excited about it? No, not really. Not really at all, to be honest with you. I'm excited about Arch Manning. It's Arch Manning time on the 40 acres. First family of football. He's been groomed for this. Takes over Quinn Ewers, now off to the NFL. And what I like most about how Arch Manning's developed, early in his career, he served as a number 3, really learned how to be a college player. Focus on your body, get bigger, get more physically mature, get stronger. Then in the second year, hey, we'll sprinkle him in a little bit. We'll use him in some obvious quarterback run situations, maybe some short yardage, maybe some red zone. They sprinkled him in just a little bit, got a couple starts because Quinn Ewers got banged up. But Arch Manning has crazy upside, and the entire college football world is so excited to see what he might be able to do. Now, he's going to have an entire offseason of number 1 reps. So those of you that saw him last year and saw maybe there were some questionable decisions from time to time, you watch a couple of his starts. There were a couple games in which he maybe tried some things that he probably shouldn't have tried. He was young. Now he has 8 months to get starter level reps. So his vision, his anticipation, his understanding of, hey, I can try that, or I probably shouldn't do that, or yeah, I can fit it in against that coverage. He's going to have a much better understanding of that because of trial and error that he will have throughout spring, summer, and then ultimately in fall camp. Now, he's got a lot of really good pieces around him. I love their wide receiver core. I love all aspects of the Texas Longhorns this year. I think they're going to be really, really good, legitimate national championship contender. And if Arch is as good as we think he's going to be, look out. The rest of the SEC might be looking up at the Texas Longhorns. But I will say this, there are some significant pieces to replace along the offensive line. Now, they've recruited well, and they do bring back one starter in senior DJ Campbell, but there's a few guys that are needing to be replaced, and I don't think that is an automatic plug and play. That group had a lot of talent last year. They played really well together. They've gone out and they got Cole Hudson, has been there for a while. He's going to slide over to center. They have former 5-stars that are probably poised to take over at certain spots, like Brandon Baker at left tackle. I think they're excited about what Trevor Gooseby did when forced into action at both left and right tackle last year in the postseason. So I think there's optimism around Texas and their offensive line, but there are a lot of pieces that need to be figured out in competition this spring so that they can keep their prized piece, Arch Manning, upright in the pocket here in 2025. The Texas A&M Aggies will open up camp on the 21st and finish up camp on April 19th. The big question is, can they continue to feature a dominant run game? Now, the last impressions, we always kind of remember a team for what they were down the stretch, right? How were you down the stretch? And that's going to be the momentum or lack thereof that you'll carry over into the upcoming season. Well, they lost 4 of their final 5 games. Okay, so it's not exactly like they're coming into the offseason feeling great about year one. When you really look at what Mike Elko had to deal with year one, there was a lot to like about what was done there in year one. I know 8-5, no one's signing up for that in Aggie land. No one expects you to sign up for that, but I think they should feel pretty good about the type of identity that was created, both offensively and defensively, and how that identity can pay dividends here this upcoming year. They are set to return all 5 starters along the offensive line. That's pretty significant. Remember last year, too, throughout the season, they had significant issues when it comes to running back depth, to the point where they were even experimenting moving Terry Bussey, who played some slot receiver, played some corner, kind of a do-it-all type of player. They even experimented putting him in at running back there for a little bit because they had lost Reuben Owens in the preseason. They lost Le'Veon Moss against South Carolina. They still finished second in the SEC by rushing for nearly 200 yards a game. Now, Owens didn't play until the last couple games, right? I mean, Moss missed the final month of the season. Amari Daniels is back, which means they could be in a really good spot with 3 guys that could all be starters at many other places that are all there on campus for the Aggies. You can also expect a pretty decent bump from Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed is his 3rd year on campus. He's a redshirt sophomore. I think there's a lot of things to like about what we saw from him. Now, were there some ups and downs? Absolutely. There were definitely some ups and downs. But I think there's going to be a lot to build on with some of the positives that came out of last year. I think he can become more of a vocal leader. And I think that leadership will allow him to be a little more confidently in driving the football into tight windows here this upcoming season. So I think A&M is one of those teams that not enough people are talking about. And with some of the pieces that are back, and they do have to replace quite a bit on defense. I get that. There's a couple of big-time difference makers along the defensive line. But with the identity that was created last year, I think there's a lot of room for A&M to be a big nuisance in the SEC this upcoming season. Finally, in the SEC, it's the Vanderbilt Commodores. They got started about a week ago. They'll finish up on April 12th. The biggest question, can Vandy find some help at wide receiver? I think if you look at Vandy last year, you got to be really proud of what was accomplished. I mean, Clark Lee won the SEC Coach of the Year. He led the Commodores to their best season in quite a while. They went 7-6. It took them to their first bowl game since 2018. Beat Alabama for the first time in 40 years. And the year before that, remember, they were 2-10 in 2023. So there was a big jump in consistency. And I think building on that foundation that was 24 will be huge. You got to find more depth. You got to be able to develop players. And that's always been something that Clark Lee's done extremely well. The best news is that some of their best players are back. That's massive. And now Clark Lee, he's not going to be calling plays anymore. He's now going to be able to give that to Randy Gregory, and he can focus on the administrative aspects of being the head coach. Diego Pavia is back at quarterback. He also brings back one of the best tight ends in the SEC. That's massive with Eli Stowers, who was all SEC last year, top receiver. He bypassed the NFL to come back for another year. Now, you're going to need some help outside of Stowers, which means Junior Sherrill could have a breakthrough season. Trenton Hudson is back as well after spending last season at Mississippi State. The year before, he was with Pavia at New Mexico State. So Hudson and Pavia and Stowers, they could be in a really good spot. So Hudson had 10 touchdowns in 2023. So a lot to like about what could happen in Nashville for Vandy. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Really appreciate you guys being with us. These are going to be fun, man. These are spring previews for all the Power 5 teams. These are really Power 4 teams. It's Power 4 now. I said Power 5. Those of you that are fans of the G5, don't worry. Keep it locked in here. We will get to you at some point. Some of the top contenders. There will be opportunities to break down what Memphis might do, what Boise might do, and some of the other teams that are not currently in P4 leagues. We'll get to you, I promise. It's just not going to be here this week or next week. We're going to focus today on the SEC. We're going to do Thursday on the Big 12. We'll do Monday on the Big 10, and then Thursday on the ACC. So a lot to look forward to here in the next 2 weeks. So keep it locked in here on Always College Football. One more thing that we need to get to. Eddie George was hired as the head coach of Bowling Green. He replaces Scott Loeffler, who left his post as the head coach to take a job with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now Eddie George, after what was a really successful stint at Tennessee State, will take over there at Bowling Green. Now, he took Tennessee State to the FCS playoffs and the first conference title in 25 years. He also, I know he's played at Ohio State, has a Heisman Trophy. Just another in the long trend of more and more guys that had highly successful playing careers that are now giving back to the game and trying to carve out a role as a college head coach. So here's hoping that it works out great for Eddie George. Knowing the type of man he is, I think it's highly likely that it will. So happy for him and look forward to seeing what he does with Bowling Green Falcons here in the months and years to come. That'll do it for us here at ACF. For all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.